Hello, and welcome to the Specialty Matcha Podcast. My name is Ryan. This is my co-host Zongjun, who also goes by Sam.
Hello, hello.
And we're the co-founders of Sanko Matcha Products.
Yeah, we launched this podcast to discuss our learning journey in matcha, share startup stories, and interview experts. And today we have Abby from Abby the Matcha Scientist joining us. Welcome, Abby.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to join you, and I love this podcast.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We really enjoy your content, and I think your short form is like really refreshing for us to hear because a lot of your content, one, has gone viral, so congratulations.
Thank you.
And it like really like spreading really important messages around marketing or mislabeling. I think we could fairly characterize it, but also just like basic science and showing like the visuals that show against that. So would love to learn more about your background as a scientist and how you got into matcha.
Yeah, definitely. So I am a chemical engineer. That's what I studied in undergraduate studies. And then I came to the West Coast to California and I did my PhD at Stanford in chemical
Wow.
engineering as well. But most of my research, I'd say, was in the intersection of like chemistry and biology. I did drug delivery. So I sort of bridged this area between like formulating things with my hands and also doing like animal studies with cancer and things like that and health related things. So I'd say I have pretty diverse scientific interests. And during grad school, I was really lucky to actually intern at Impossible Foods. So I got a
Oh,
little
okay.
bit of exposure to food science there and kind of what matters, like oxidation and things like that. And so after I finished at Stanford, I went on and now I work in biotech at a pharmaceutical company developing mostly cancer drugs, but all sorts of drugs for different indications. I'd say I'm very passionate about health. I pay attention to a lot of my own health choices. Yeah, and so I'd say towards the end of my PhD, when I was at Stanford a few years ago, we took a trip to Japan. And that was really my first exposure to like proper matcha. I didn't really know too much about it before then. I was getting like the matcha smoothie at Jamba Juice and things like that before then. Not really like what I'd say I drink now at all. My going to Japan just really opened my eyes up to like what matcha can be. We went to a tea ceremony. I'd say that changed everything. When I came home, I started drinking a lot more matcha from cafes, eventually started making it at home. And yeah, that was kind of my intro into matcha and how I got here.
Oh, very cool. Chemical
Interesting.
engineering. I was a chemistry undergrad, but I always had a lot of admiration for the chemi people because I feel like you had to take like 10 times more math and physics and like it was more application based. I was like, oh, wow, I wish I had the brain for that, but I never did.
Nah, I'd say my heart probably lies more in chemistry and biology, but I think the applications with math enable a lot of things and jobs and opportunities. So that's kind of why I went the path I went.
Yeah, it's cool you have the crossover in food too and product development. Like a lot of cool stuff going on in that space.
Very cool.
So, what was the impetus for starting like the channel?
Yeah, so as I got more into matcha and was, after this trip to Japan, started drinking it at home, I'd say I first embraced it really for its taste and its beauty and its health, all of those reasons. But then I'd say I started asking myself questions related to the science, like what's the best way to make this? How does temperature affect it? Why are some matchas so much more expensive than other? Why does certain matchas taste really nutty, other ones taste really earthy? And so I started asking myself those questions, and I started doing actually my own research to answer those questions myself. I definitely found that, just like general social media content, there's a lot of people who focus more on visuals and, making cool drinks. And then there's a lot of brands that, put out some basic educational content, but they're really focused on their marketing materials. And so I couldn't really find what I was asking myself, these kind of basic scientific questions from the point of view of someone who's buying the matcha. And so then one day, kind of impulsively, I'd say, like, I was like, why am I doing all this research just for me? I should be like sharing this to people who have these questions like me. And really my goal is to empower the consumer so that, they feel educated when they're buying matcha.
Love that.
Get rid of this like black box of like hundreds of matchas available. Like which one should I buy? Yeah.
Interesting. Actually, what was your experience researching all of these topics? Because we kind of been doing a lot of these research as well, and frequently, a lot of the information are just not available in like English. So
No, definitely. There's a huge lack of scientific content available. And so it is a challenge to do research. I was looking on Google Scholar, and there's literally 1,000 times more entries on Google Scholar about coffee than matcha.
Oh,
And there's about 100 times more Google Scholar entries about green tea than specifically matcha.
Yeah.
And so there's really a lack of academic study, like, peer reviewed study on matcha. There's not a lot out there. And so primarily, I have to really scan the internet from brands using different AI tools to find real educational content to share. And obviously, things like even this podcast, you share a lot of great information. I really loved your episode about the different grinding techniques and going deeper into the science there. So definitely it is a challenge to find very legitimate content to share. And so I have to do a lot of digging.
yeah. It's a lot of digging. And I found too, like I'm deep down a rabbit hole around like what actually is Uji matcha, which will eventually it will but definitely be the most researched thing that we ever put out because it is such a complicated story and like there are contradictions everywhere. And then I'm wondering, okay, why are half the people on the internet saying this? Why are the other half saying this? And then like you have to go deep down these rabbit holes. And I actually think the new AI tools are really good at understanding like the intent of a question just for research. Like I sort of trust summaries. I don't trust it for like blind answers, but like just as a more sophisticated search engine, I've had a lot of success like
Totally. And
digging
leading you
deep.
to sources too. Like,
Yeah,
I think giving you like 10 different things that maybe contradict each other, but at least you have the 10 and you
yeah,
can kind of self bring them together. Yeah.
kind of amazing. Because even like 5, 10 years ago, like the translation tools sucked. It would be way more difficult to just run through like a 20-page PDF. But like now in the last 2 years, it's kind of a great time to be on the edge of knowledge researching this stuff.
No, definitely. It definitely accelerates how quickly I can put together a video, because you don't have to spend all that time like self finding all the sources.
You've done a lot of recent posts about using like colorimetry. So I am aware that colorimetry exists. I'm aware that measuring color is a pretty well understood science as compared to something like sensory science, where there's lots of problems with different sensory methods. You basically always have to make a compromise. But from what I understand, colorimetry, you can basically objectively measure color. So if you could talk a little bit about that and then how it works and then what you've found based on using this method.
So when I first started thinking about my channel, one of the initial ideas I had, I was like, what science can I do? What can I easily do at home on a minimal budget? I'm not earning any money with this. It's really purely for fun. And the first kind of idea I came across was colorimetry. It's something you can just order a colorimeter on Amazon. It's an extremely, like you said, objective measurement. It's pretty easy to do. There's not a lot of mess involved. And so, yeah, I ordered this. Let's see, this NYX colorimeter. So it's literally this little machine. I mean, it is expensive, but I've gotten a lot of use out of it. And so literally what I do is I take about like 1/8 of a teaspoon of this, just a little scoop of matcha. I'll put it on a white matte background. I'll take a spatula and basically pat it into as flat of a film as I can, such that there's it's really no cracks or view of any white underneath. You want just like a packed
Right.
film. I'll very gently place this on top such that there's no cracks like in these grooves. And then I'll use my phone and take a measurement. And I try to do this in a dark room. And so yeah, this is definitely something I've leaned into as a feasible thing to do at home with science. And I'm definitely trying to find other measurements I can do at home to help people understand matcha and put data out there.
Cool. Have you tried over your like elongated period, like when you have like a can of matcha open from day to day to day? So like what's the longest period from like can first open to some date? Like was there a significant change in the color?
So I'm working on that now. I don't have a full set of measurements yet. Typically, I just have measured opened within a few days and I take the measurement. But it's something I'm doing right as we speak is
Oh,
trying to
cool.
take a time course to see if we can actually quantify over time what it's looking like. And I'm also looking at the different storage methods, like keeping one out in the day sunlight in the room, one packaged away, one
Yeah,
in the freezer. So I'm taking those like temporally right now to see
Interesting.
what happens to the color.
love it.
Could also be interesting to take different measurements for different cultivars because different cultivars have different pigments and chlorophyll content. So
Yeah, thus far I've focused on, I'd say, blends people are familiar with, just
Yeah.
to stay relevant. People have certain matchas they really love, and so those seem to appeal. But definitely, as I move forward, I'm going to start region, cultivar, breaking it apart more and more. It is interesting. I've noticed the Yame matchas are definitely less green than the Uji matchas.
Wow.
It sort of makes sense because they're roasted differently, or so they just go through a little bit of a different processing technique, and so it makes sense they're a little darker than maybe the Uji.
Yeah. Grinding method plays an impact too, because something we've noticed in our own grinding experiments, the finer you go, the brighter it gets.
or
So,
color, the
yeah.
green color you
It
get.
makes sense. There's a few different things going into this. It
Yeah.
makes sense why I've consistently seen that the most expensive matchas are the most green. The
Mm.
trend is definitely there. So I think that should hopefully help give consumers some confidence that if they are spending more, it's pretty likely it is a better quality. There's not a lot of deviation from that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. It'd be cool to do a humidity experiment too, because like we've been interacting with so much tencha and like we're developing a machine in like Shenzhen, Guangzhou area, which is like super humid. And like if we don't properly seal a bag of tencha, it's like almost soft. It's like shocking.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely notice over time just from consuming matcha that, like, the more time you've used a tin, you see more and more little, like, clusters forming. The humidity is bringing them into, like, little pebbles, basically.
Yeah. What would that be? Is there would be like some like hydrogen bonding going on? So like it sucks in the water and then those form and that's why it gets sticky?
Yeah, I mean, matcha's, I guess, number 1, very hydrophobic, so it's super prone to clumping, and then when some gets some water, it wants to basically eat it and form, like, a self-conglomerate, basically. So, yeah, there's a lot of different physical interactions going on with matcha.
Yeah, I wonder if moisture too affects packing efficiency. So I was talking with one of my friends who's in food engineering. He kept using the term packing efficiency. I was thinking, oh, I never thought about it that way. And how, like, I bet even like a 1 micron lower, like from 5 to 4, like you can really affect that. I don't know at what point that starts getting like really clumpy from a packing efficiency perspective.
One thing you do notice is that all these facilities have AC just blast on, 24/7.
Yeah, matcha is very delicate, and I think that's what makes it so fun, is that there's all
Mm,
these different
ephemeral.
parameters to understand about what's making it degrade. There's a million different ways it degrades, and so there's a lot of different ways to understand it and improve upon it, and yeah.
Yeah. Wow, I bet there are like a lot of shocking similarities between matcha and like pharmaceutical, like all these drug powders. Like do you
Yeah.
find that like the
Definitely. I think my experience in lab, measuring little amounts and being precise and, having patience and rerunning experiments, I think all of that is direct translation to, running home experiments with little bits of matcha
yeah.
powder and things like that. So there's a lot of lab skills, and then I just general science skills as well, just the scientific method and being able to parse a lot of information on the internet into something that I believe is, scientifically credible. Yeah.
Yeah. It'd be really cool if you take a fresh can of matcha, open it, let it sit for a day, and weigh it before and after. I would love to know how much
No,
water.
these are awesome ideas.
Yeah. We don't have access to a scale like that, but I'm sure you do.
No, I have a decent scale. I'd say as I get more momentum on my channel, I am starting to invest a little bit more and more to improve all my tools.
That's awesome. I read through a lot of your comment sections from your videos. Like, what's your take on the online discourse and like the way this goes, and like the way people approach these dialogues? It's interesting to read through, like especially your videos because they're educational content. And actually, I'd say like I don't know, it feels like over 50% are like pretty constructive, which is it's an interesting space to read through actually.
No, yeah, I was honestly blown away by the amount of enthusiasm I got when I started. I get tons of direct messages with random questions about matcha, and people be saying like, "I'm so glad there's a matcha scientist." Like And a lot of people have questions about what matcha to buy. I'd say that's the number one thing is overwhelmed with choices and not sure where to start. But overall, I've been amazed by the amount of enthusiasm. I'd say in terms of online, I think there's definitely different communities and demographics of people who are interested in matcha. There's people who are probably more interested in the aesthetics and the brands and things like that. There's kind of the tea specialists who know a ton about tea. Definitely, I'd say I'm a scientist learning about matcha, but there's tons of people who have lived in Japan and studied the technique and know all of the kind of culture around it. So there's kind of that community, and there's also kind of a community focused really on wellness, people drinking matcha for the health benefits. And so I try to design my content to appeal to all of them. Some of them speaks to different groups more than another. I really think just focusing on education can bring them together. But overall, yeah, I think the response to my videos are super supportive, constructive. People are really respectful. Sometimes I'll get a comment saying like, "You're not making matcha the right way," or "You're not saying the
Always.
Japanese terms correctly. How dare you?" And honestly, I really do my best to do things correctly and honor the tradition. So I think people need to have grace for each other that, we're all trying to share the celebration of matcha, and just be happy.
I think a scientist learning matcha is like the best way to put it. Like, because like we're all learning matcha every day.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned so much through doing these videos. Like I said, the inspiration was just I had questions and I wanted to answer them. And so still, I don't know all the answers to my videos, all of my future videos. I'm gonna have a question and then keep answering the questions. So
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that it's non-commercial too, because it's a curiosity driven, like very obviously curiosity driven, and like you bring a very clear and objective point of view. Like, because a lot of, including our own content, right? Like, if you're connected to this economically some way, like we are, or some of the brands doing basically content marketing, right? You always have to like question the perspective. So it's really refreshing to see that, and someone like also just like directly pointing out people like ceremonial grade doesn't mean anything.
that's the content that's probably resonated the most is just different marketing terms, understanding what's legitimate and what's not. I think people really need that and want that. That's been clear from my content.
Did you get any pushback on that on your ceremonial grade content?
I'd say there's some people who are like, of course, it's their right to do marketing tactics. And I agree. I'm just pointing it out. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I think some people that take it as, maybe anti capitalism or something like that. And I'm not bashing capitalism at all. I'm just pointing it out so that the consumer's aware that it really doesn't mean anything scientific.
Yeah. Okay.
Interesting.
Ah, interesting. Actually, I'm surprised you didn't get more pushback on that term, because it's so many people use it. And what's interesting is like the matcha founders that we talk to, like some people know, like, yeah, we know it's not good, but we kind of have to. So it's
Yeah.
like the other side of the capitalistic too.
Almost like if you don't put it on your tin, someone might not buy it because it's not marked ceremonial grade at this point. So it's a tough like gray area to navigate if you have a matcha brand probably.
Yeah, and also realistically, you do, by the end of the day, need a system to kind of indicate quality. So, like, what should people do? That's
No,
kind of
definitely. It's
yeah.
you're in a tough space and it's tricky. I'd say they try to market as like ceremonial grade premium and then maybe culinary grade, but there's even in when I was creating this kind of matcha greenness list, there's not many just premium matchas that don't identify as ceremonial and don't identify as culinary. It's pretty binary. There's not many people in between.
Mm.
I'd say some of the Japanese brands blatantly say, this is more meant for sucha, it's not meant for koicha, and it's not culinary. But by far, the most are marking themselves as ceremonial.
Yeah, makes sense. What do you see some of the biggest problems right now in the matcha world? Because across the vendors, across your audience, across like this whole landscape as you see it, maybe other than the shortage, which is well documented.
No, totally. I think there's a few. I think the first is Westerners have sort of this black box barrier to understanding matcha. Like I said, I didn't know where to start when I was interested in matcha. I bought like a matcha latte mix, not knowing it was any different from matcha. Even since I've started this channel, my dad texted me like how do I order this? He wants to be supportive. He's like, how do I make this? Where do I start? I think a lot of Americans grew up with coffee and just have no clue where to start. So there's sort
Yeah.
of this enigma, barrier to entry. A lot of it is labeled in Japanese. We don't know how to even get going. I get so many messages on Instagram of people asking me like, what matcha should I buy from my cafe? They're just lost in this category. And so I think that's one. It's just not even knowing how to enter is a problem. I think another big problem is transparency from brands. So many brands put out these blends and tell us nothing about them. I think I would love to know, like you were saying, like, can we measure cultivars? Can we say what region it's even from and more specifics? And I think by brands revealing this information, it would actually lead to more enthusiasm, not less,
Yeah.
and more interest in their product because it's hard for me to say anything about a certain blend if I know nothing about it, right? It's just labeled with a name. And so a lot more transparency there, but also transparency with health related and ingredient related things. Very few matchas actually reveal their caffeine content, L-theanine content. I would love if more of them measured for heavy metals.
Mm.
Yeah.
I did a video on getting my own blood tested for lead and heavy metals. And, I was clean, but those tests, even the smallest amount of heavy metals is actually dangerous and bad, even if a test can't pick it up. And I definitely think for like women who might want to have kids, like
Yeah.
no one wants to be drinking heavy metals.
Yeah.
And caffeine levels are super important for that too. And so I wish there was more transparency on the ingredients. And that's definitely something I'm interested in just potentially testing in the future is like getting a whole slew of popular matcha
That'd be
brands
cool.
measured.
No.
The
Yeah.
problem is that's very expensive. So, Lead Safe Mama has some initiatives to measure different matchas for heavy metals. She's found a handful that have higher than I'd like amounts
Whoa.
of heavy metals in them, which is a little concerning. So yeah, I definitely think from that front, brands could be more transparent.
Yeah. I think it was James Hoffman, the famous coffee influencer. It was either him or Michael Pollan or something. Someone in the coffee food world or food world said that caffeine is like the most widely consumed drug where we have no idea what the dosage is. Caffeine, it's measured, even like where like marijuana is legal, like it's measured. But caffeine, like we have no idea. And I know that the variance is huge in matcha.
Exactly. I guess number one is there's a baseline variance in caffeine, and then in matcha, then we have no idea. And so I have people asking me, am I safe to have 6 cups of matcha per day? And so, I don't know how to respond. I mean, maybe they're drinking matcha that's way lower in caffeine, like who really knows? It sounds probably not safe. Like I recommend like 3 or less, but it's tough to answer that when there's not transparency from the brands and you don't know what you're consuming. So I think that's a major one for me is just add things to the label, do the measurements. Supplements are like omega-3 fatty acid supplements have to publish a lot of their like mercury levels and things like that and oxidation levels and like it's matcha if people are drinking it every day we should be confident that it's safe.
Yeah,
Nice.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think one other problem just relating back to really the whole mission of my channel is a lack of scientific studies. I think that's
Mm.
a last one is just there's so much more research on coffee and green tea. Like I mentioned, like 1,000 times more on coffee, like 100 times more on green tea. And so some really clean clinical trials looking at the health effects would be amazing. As I mentioned, a deeper dive into what it's actually made of would be amazing. So I think that's a major problem as well.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree.
Little bit hard to get this kind of research funded in a non-biased way nowadays because we
That's
have
true.
been running into some research that's properly published peer review paper, but you can definitely see like it has a bias towards a certain way,
Nah,
especially some of the
definitely.
Japanese language publication. It's sometimes funded by a larger corp into doing some sort of research.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you look at like the skincare industry,
Mm.
certain brands, like I really like a brand called SkinCeuticals, they run their own trials on their products to
Mm.
like prove that they work. And so I'd love a matcha brand, I guess, that got big enough to run its own health trials.
Yeah.
Yeah. To, like, prove efficacy and have the burden of proof shift like on the manufacturer.
Because
Yeah.
it would be huge if there was data out there that showed, having matcha every day can lower your cholesterol, things like that. It likely does, but there's no data out there proving the numbers or the amount that it actually could.
Yeah. Or having fresh ground matcha is healthier. There's our
Right.
corporate interest.
Right.
But we truly believe it because like it kind of makes sense. It's such a extreme surface area to volume ratio and it's already a very delicate product.
No, yeah, I wish I could have one of your machines at my house.
We'll eventually make a consumer version, but might take some time. The motor just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger as like we wanted to get the right efficiency and the right particle size. The motor itself is very heavy,
It has enough torque to drag like a small like Toyota Prius.
probably not very fast, but
That's a fun fact to share.
so I have an kind of a fun question. If you could design any experiment in any field, like the chemistry side, the agricultural side, nutrition, within matcha, how would you set up that experiment if resources were not a constraint?
There's so many I would do. I guess from the chemistry side, I think the number one would be, let's take a slew of matchas and look at the different variations in caffeine and L-theanine and lead and all those components, like a lot of like LCMS, put it through a column, look what it's actually made of would be probably the first experiment I'd run. I'd say second priority on my list is some very controlled human trials. Like how does drinking matcha affect cholesterol? How is it suppressing appetite? That's another one is, drinking matcha and all these antioxidants could lead to weight loss. I mean, there's no data on that. I think I'd be, also interested in brain effects, some trials on that. I think in another sphere, another experiment that I think would be really cool is just have a huge number of people consume matcha, like a set of matcha samples, reveal how they perceive the taste,
Oh
and
yeah,
then reveal
flavor.
how much they like it, and just see that variance. Because I do think, like, there's a world where, you could design, like, personalized blends based off of, like, what people say about their sensory feedback.
Yeah.
But as we said, that's really challenging because it's so subjective, and someone might give a different answer day to day of what they taste.
True.
So that is hard. I'd love to use your machine and look at different particle sizes, and just look at how it sediments. There's potential to design like, ready-made drinks if we had particles that didn't sediment as easily. And, how does that affect mouthfeel? At some point, it probably becomes gummy and like is there a sweet spot where it doesn't sediment, but it still feels okay in the mouth is a question I've had too.
That's interesting. And it'd be really cool to know too, for especially for a latte. I think that the 5 microns might be overkill because you increase the viscosity. I think the suspension can, those particles can dance around way longer, and maybe just we're milling way too fine or unnecessarily fine, or not. I don't know, but that'd be cool to do too.
Yeah, I guess from my experience, I guess I consistently see things sediment, and so that's why I
Okay.
just wish I knew the particle size. If you're aware of a matcha that's on the lower end of particle sizes, it would be fun to experiment with.
That's interesting.
Mm.
I know we were aware that some of the really mass-produced matcha, some of the grade distinctions are actually how long it went through a ball mill. It's like milling is driving that different quality distinction. Just super weird.
That affects like the shape and the size, right? And how big are you aware of like the biggest end of the milling numbers? Like how big
Oh,
of
yeah, beyond 20. I think
okay.
20 to
Yeah,
30.
larger than 20. So actually, for some of the even traditional methods, most of the commercial ECUs nowadays in Japan have a diameter of about, they call it the Japanese 1 foot. So it's about like 30-ish like centimeter. But traditionally they use like way larger ECUs. They call it like 2 foot, sometimes 5 foot. And they get the matcha sometimes so fine that, as you said, it starts to gum up. And it's actually not a good indicator of quality. And they kind of abandon that size nowadays.
I think that would be a really interesting experiment is just have different particle size matchas, look at how they sediment and how they affect mouthfeel. And, it's a distribution. So I'm also interested to just know how messy is the distribution, even within that, and how do these different grinding techniques lead to different distributions, probably as well.
Oh yeah, just like how the coffee people talk about that and their like bird geometries and whatever, and different distribution. Actually, we can share some after the call because we measured distributions from our mill and from Nishiusu. What's really weird is you have a little hump around 1 micron. So there's some really interesting things. I don't know what it is. Our food engineering friend had a hypothesis that when you mill that fine, if I think it was within the context of like soy protein or something, you can do dry fractions and separate the different fractions from each other. Some are more protein heavy, some are more whatever heavy. And he was suspecting that maybe there's some components that are coming. I don't know what they are.
Some
Anyway,
of the
it'd be
That's
really
pretty
cool
cool.
to know that part too.
Yeah. But in coffee too, right? You always get like what they call the ultra fine, right? Like
Yeah,
in coffee. Yeah.
ultra fines and boulders, which you don't want typically for those. And typically, I think it depends too, and if it's espresso or if it's pour over the grind size distribution that you want. Because the EK43 got very famous for having a pretty narrow, spiky, unimodal distribution. And it
Yeah.
has something to do with like the compact efficiency of an espresso puck and the way those, because you're putting like, what is it, 9 bar through that bed of coffee and you can't get it to channel and like you have to get it to extract evenly. To a couple talks on the espresso physics, it's fascinating. Like if you read into that world, it is so much more complicated than making matcha. But I wonder how it even affects extraction too, because if you have different size distributions of matcha particles, maybe you get different extraction.
Probably. I mean, it's all about surface area, right? So,
Yeah,
like, having different sizes, I'm sure you probably get way more when there's more surface area to volume.
yeah,
But according to like people we talked to in Japan, that you actually want matcha have different sizes in the middle. You don't want it to be very homogeneous in one particle size.
I guess
And
I'd push back there and say, what's the scientific evidence on that?
yeah,
we'd
yeah, yeah.
love to
It's
know.
we don't know. And according to
And
them,
I think that's part of the challenges we're talking about is there's a lot of sort of hearsay around matcha. This is the right way to do it. A lot of tradition, which we should all respect, but also there should be some acceptance of questioning it and getting the data.
Well,
yeah,
in the
yeah,
context that we
for
learned
sure.
that, it would have been absolutely inappropriate for us to say, like, "Can you point us in the right direction, please? Like, could we prove this?" It's actually really hampers our ability to learn, because even, like, in our learning journey and, like, in the podcast, we have to preface it with, "We heard," or "Someone told us."
Right.
And, like, in a lot of the context, it is just either culturally or situationally, we just can't dig deeper. And then, like, that opportunity goes, and it really slows down learning, and I can't imagine what it's like being a Japanese person stuck in this sphere because we 'cause we're coming in from the outside looking in, but imagine being in the system and, like, there's all these formalities around talking with people older than you or people who've won these awards, like, it's not culturally acceptable to question, "How do you know this and why? And can you prove it?" But, like, in the West, that's, like, totally a fine thing to ask.
Yeah, I think that's a major challenge is there's this delicate balance of respecting culture, tradition, honoring it, not breaking norms, but also pushing innovation, asking questions, taking data. And so I think that's like a fine balance to navigate.
At least it's heading in the right direction, though.
Yeah.
No,
Because even
definitely.
apparently, like 5, 10 years ago, no one even wanted to give cultivars. Like, why do you want to know the cultivar? Like, who cares? No consumers care. Like, that's like apparently where the conversation was at. And now it's like very obvious. Like, people care. Not only do people care, they're shelling out tons of money for these single cultivar products. They're worth more on their own than they are blended, which is probably
Right.
unthinkable.
Knowing the cultivar, knowing the region allows us to have a better, deeper understanding, to calibrate our own palate of, what tastes like what. And I think ultimately being more transparent would garner more interest rather than hurting it.
Yeah.
Well, traditionally, the knowledge was monopolized by all these
Mm,
tashis, like tea blenders. By showing this to regular consumers, you basically are breaking this authority of
mm.
discourse, challenging for them too,
It's so interesting because a question about science ends up turning into something much more cultural very quickly about the way this information
and
spread
political.
and political.
No, totally. I get a lot of questions. I've done some videos on the history of matcha, some videos on the shortage, and it's all related to the science. It's like, why don't you have these answers? Part of it is cultural.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And it's interesting too as like new cultures enter like this sphere trying to source or learn about matcha. We get some messages occasionally and it is so transactional and they're trying to source and they think that we sell matcha. I have to tell them that we don't. And then they respond pretty aggressively because I'm probably the only person who responded to them because like all the Japanese tea farmers are like inundated. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, like, there's some cultural sensitivity that needs to be learned, and, like, a Japanese tea farmer is never going to respond to the way that you wrote this email. But I can't say that. So it's
No,
interesting
totally.
seeing these people mix,
It's
and
a
it's
very delicate balance of, between cultures and yeah.
yeah. Require especially in Japan, like, there's so much sensitivity, which is both great and, like, horrible at the same time, like, very frustrating. But, it's a constraint.
But I think it's heading in the right direction. With time, things will uncover.
Yeah, and all the different projects, like even like Obubu tea farms, like they've had what 150 interns from like every country of the world. Like now there's 150 people you can ask in English, like what was it like farming tea in Wazuka? And
Pretty
like
cool.
they know farmers, like that's so cool that alumni network. Like that's also stuff that didn't exist and like things like this, which is just awesome to see.
No, yeah, I'd love to do that. It sounds so cool and get the inside scoop.
Absolutely. So I have a question about your content creation process. You are very short form. I think that's exclusively what you do
Pretty
is short
much,
form
yeah.
content. How do you get it in a reasonable like timeline? 'Cause I've tried to make some scripts for short term content. I can't do it. Like my brain does not work that way, which is why we're podcasters. I'm
Yeah,
pretty
I'd
sure
say
I
it's slightly forced because of my life constraints because, I work full time, I'm pretty busy, and so short form is something I can kind of manage to get out almost daily, and so really I keep an idea list, like, in my phone and on my computer, so really whenever, like, a question pops into my brain or I come across something, I write down the idea, bucket the ideas into, like, kinda different categories, I'd say, how viral they could be based off of what I know from previous videos. So that's kind of the idea generation. And then, typically I film these when I get home from work in like the afternoon. And so I'll take the idea, say I want this to be like about 30 seconds to a minute long. That's my normal length. And then typically I break it up into like 5 to 10 statements. I'm like, what 5 to 10 statements can
Mm,
encapsulate this idea and give the message I want to give? And so then I work hard on those 5 to 10 statements, basically like distill it into, what is relatable, what is conveying the educational content kind of mixed in so that people don't even realize they're learning.
Mm.
And so really trying to narrow down like what 5 to 10 things can I say. And then the filming is honestly usually quick for me is, I'll make some matcha, tell my story and film it. And, then I'll take a few takes of the different parts. Yeah, I think then I'll stitch together the kind of 10 different blocks, try to add graphics or videos that, supplement what I'm saying. Try to make the first 5 seconds, or I focus on a lot in the editing, trying to make it as appealing as possible so that people don't scroll past. And yeah, that's really my process is just kind of focusing on getting like a few key messages, lumping it into 30 seconds to a minute. And yeah, that's all.
sounds easy.
And
I'm sure it's not.
definitely I've been trying to mix in like more home experiment type, whisking demos or, I did the one like where I basically like ultra boiled water
Mm,
and like show the differences. See, those take a little more time for me because I don't have any training in video or, crafting, graphic design. And so definitely I'm a little slower at making things look nice if I'm focusing on that compared to just videos where I'm talking. But yeah, it's pretty fun. And I kind of like the short form because I can just kind of get it done in really one day. I won't do it all at once, but it's sort of like a one day project and on to the next. And definitely as I've started, I want to experiment with what resonates with people. So putting out more short content allows me just to see, what do people like, what do people not like, and what's hitting or not. And so hopefully in the future I can expand and do more long form on the things that I get a lot of great feedback from.
Love it. And I love the consumer like centricity too. Science perspective, curiosity driven, and then like really just helping making people make better decisions and choices and
Yeah, I mean,
learn.
that's the goal is, for me, I felt like I had a lot of questions that just weren't being answered through the current offerings on social media. So I kind of wanted to be that person that's scientific, but still fun.
Awesome. It's working.
It's really captured the attention of a lot of people.
Yeah, I've been surprised by the reception. It's been awesome.
We were excited to see it. It's like, oh wow, finally, someone started a matcha science account. That was my first thought. Sort of as one last question to wrap up. I'd love to learn about your future plans and where you're going to take the, I don't know what to call it, the channel, the content, the brand forward.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd say right now I still see myself in the early stages. Oh, it's only been going a few months, and the reception's been awesome. So definitely my goal for now is just building the community bigger. Keep putting out fun content, see what people like, see what people are interested in. So that's really my goal. I think I'd love with time to expand on the science. Like we said, I focused a lot on these colorimetry measurements. I've done a lot of different like whisking home experiments, how can we make better matcha? But I'd love to expand on that and try to find new tools. Can I do particle measurements? Can I measure for lead and things like that? I'm definitely expanding on the science. And then potentially in the future, maybe going into long form or doing a newsletter, maybe, just expanding the type of content I might do. And definitely, we traveled to Japan really before I got into matcha and that opened my eyes, but I'd love to do another trip to Uji or all of the tea regions and kind of go back behind the curtain, and see what that's like. So that would be pretty cool, but definitely just for now I want to grow my audience, build
Nice.
a community. Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
And one thing could be interesting is some kind of like crowdfunding, like experiment. Like you list all these experiment you wanted to do, and let people choose. Like
No,
what kind of
definitely. I mean,
experiment
that's
they want.
something Lead Safe Mama I had noticed does is she has her audience nominate things they want tested for lead.
Okay.
Mm,
And so she's measured a few matchas, but I'd say they're typically more like it was like Jade Leaf, matcha.com. I'd love to see some of the Japanese brands as well and more of a mix. So I think that would be pretty cool.
yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Or even a call for experiments. I know I'd have a bunch of requests too. And if you ever need help getting reference samples or stuff like that, that's something we're working on at the moment. Like we're trying to find tencha that it's like very like, transparently sourced. Like we know like as much detail as we can about it, but happy to help contribute however we can.
That would be amazing. Like I said, like knowing particle size, knowing even the cultivar so that I can like, add that to my colorimetry like filter, if that makes sense. Like
But
if you
yeah,
filter by cultivar, you can see the differences. That would be so cool.
yeah, that'd be super cool. That'd be really
Awesome.
cool. Awesome. Well, love your content and I can't wait to see your channel grow and really appreciate it. Like the matcha world really needs this. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And to all the listeners, thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this, please consider sharing it with a friend, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks.
See you in the future.
See you.
See ya.